Pre-Prohibition lagers hark back to the late 1800s, crafted by German immigrants who brought their European-style brewing techniques to America and adapted them using local ingredients such as six-row barley and corn. Brülosophy contributor Will Lovell has put his unique spin on this beer with a short and shoddy approach, using only a 30-minute mash and boil. But can such a truly quick process do justice to this historical beer style? Well, to answer that, we've invited 25 participants to taste and rate Will's creation. Let's find out how this beer turns out. This episode is sponsored by Yakima Valley Hops. More on them in a bit.
Hi, my name is Will Lovell. I'm a contributor with Brülosophy.com.
Well, why Pre-Prohibition lager?
Well, it's not a style that I've had a ton of exposure to, but there is a brewery up the road in Austin, Texas called Live Oak Brewing, and they're quite a popular place if you want to go down and sit and have a nice lager. And they have a Pre-Pro Pils, which is kind of their version of a Pre-Prohibition lager, and it is one of the more delightful things to drink. It is actually one of their favorite beers that they have on tap, and every time I go there, I'm sure to have a pint.
Now, I brewed one of these myself years ago. It's been a long time, so I was curious to kind of remind myself how this works. I had a look at the BJCP guidelines. It said this is a clean, refreshing, but bitter pale lager, but it has a grainy, sweet corn flavor.
Right. And so grainy sweet corn is one of those weird things because some people, one person's grainy sweet corn is another person's, I'm going to mark it as DMS. And so it's a very fine line to get there. But as a man that happens to have quite a bit of Texas malt malted blue corn on hand, I felt like that of the Brülosophy contributors, I was uniquely up to the task to kind of make this my own with that malted blue corn.
So tell me about this malted blue corn, because I know you've used that in a few experiments.
So this malted blue corn is actually a really cool ingredient. Texas malt, they make it. And so, flaked corn, you would actually, kind of steam it and run it through some rollers and flatten it out and then dry it. But malted blue corn kind of goes through a germination process just like you would for malted barley and all of that. And so they actually get it from a farm up in North Texas. That farm is the same farm that makes most of the blue corn for all of the blue tortilla chips that you've been getting at grocery stores, at least in the South, and specifically in Texas. And so it's pretty cool to kind of share an ingredient with what's going on in a lot of people's tortilla chips.
Now, the characteristic ingredients, looking at what the BJCP say here, they recommend six-row barley and then 20 to 30% flaked maize, that's corn or rice, to dilute the excessive protein levels. What did you use for your malt bill?
Well, you can just say that I used Tex malt, two-row Pilsner malt. Six-row barley is not something I keep on hand. Not that I wouldn't mind having a little bit, but it's not really anything I want to keep in stock for normal things because I don't typically use six-row barley for anything. I also used 2 pounds, which made up about 13.8% of the grist for the malted blue corn. And then also added just a touch of Munich malt just to give it a little bit of color and a little bit of a backbone to it.
All right, well, we'll talk about the hops and the yeast in a moment, but I'd like to talk about your brew day because you brewed this one in our short and shoddy style. So how are you short and shoddy in this brew day?
Pretty much most of my brew days, whether short and shoddy otherwise, I like to get kind of a head start. So either the night before or the morning of, I like to get all my water prepped and all of my grains kind of weighed out. This one requires a little bit extra preparation because the malted blue corn, I kind of want to crack it. And so I have to get a food processor that I have, and usually about a half pound at a time, go in there, run it through a few times, just get some cracked kernels. And then once you get those cracked kernels, then you feel pretty good about it. Then I have to kind of put that in the bucket and then go to the next little batch. And so I had to run it through about 3-4 times, get everything cracked and going through. Otherwise, I don't think you get very much extraction because for whatever reason, the malted blue corn doesn't get quite as much extraction rate or yield as you would with, say, flaked maize or something like that.
It's not something you could run through your grain mill, though.
If you wanted to run through your grain mill, I mean, I do it through yours, Martin. I just wouldn't do it through mine. This stuff is really hard. It's really big. If you have your gap set for something like a Veruna bag setup, which is kind of, I do the bag inside of the basket, I don't think it's even really going to go through. And so I think you just have more potential for causing problems.
So tell me about brew day. Tell me how you went about brewing this beer.
So the beautiful thing is when you set it up the night before, you walk in, all your water is nice and hot and ready to go. And so basically I just kind of put my grains into the mash. Then I stir them in gently. It's really cool because when you have that blue corn, it actually has kind of this like almost purplish bluish hue as it's like sitting inside of the the grain bin. Brew day started at 8:07. I did a mash, put all my grains in, did a 30-minute mash. After the 30-minute mash was complete, I get it up on my my grain basket sitting on top. And while it's draining, it's a no sparge batch. So while it's kind of just draining into the actual Delta all-in-one systems, I'm cranking it up to boiling. And so that's boiling underneath while it's kind of dripping, just to save a little bit of time. And then quick squeeze of the bag to make sure I get up to my volume. And once I get to my pre-boil volume, obviously I wait for it to come to a boil. And then I added 55 grams of malthood hops at the initial 30-minute mark, and those boil for 30 minutes. And then I added a 15-gram addition of malthood at 15 minutes. And as soon as it was done, I put in my jaded immersion chiller, let it cool off. After about 5 minutes, it was down to around, usually gets around 85, 90 degrees this time of year. And then kind of testing out my new glycol setup, I was able to get that in my Delta firm tank, put on the glycol coil, and then it was able to cool it down pretty quick. And then I basically was pitching, you started at 8:07, and then I was pitching yeast by 10:07 into 83 Fahrenheit work.
A 2-hour brew day, isn't it wonderful? I love short and shoddy.
Absolutely amazing. It's pretty sweet spot. So after that, set my fermentation temperature to 62, stayed there for about 5 days. On March 6th, I cold crashed, and then it actually got down to basically temperature to move it over to a keg after about 40 minutes. And so I added gelatin at that point about 2 or 3 hours later after I started cold crashing on March 6th. And then, about 3 or 4 days later, it was ready to go and served to tasters.
Now, before we find out how this beer turned out, including results from 25 participants who rated the beer, a quick word on today's sponsor, Yakima Valley Hops. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world. I'm using Yakima Valley hops in every batch I brew, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, and many, many more. Homebrewers can select specific crop years, and most hops come in 2, 8, and 16-ounce packages. I personally love using the 8-ounce bags, which gives me plenty of hops for a brew day, and I can store any leftovers in my freezer for use in future brews. Head over to yakimavalleyhops.com to see everything they have to offer. Okay, now, Will, before you served your beers to tasters, presumably you tried the beer yourself.
Well, I actually happen to have a glass of it right here. It's actually some condensation, but you can see where there might have been some nice head here with the lacing, and it did have pretty good head retention. It's actually, if you can get the condensation off, it is a crystal clear beer with the magic of gelatin. When you smell it, you definitely get kind of those grainy, crackery, biscuity notes that you might expect from a pre-prohibition lager. Taste-wise, it's clean, it's delicious. There is a little bit of bitterness from the hops on the back end of it. Not too bitter, but also just a little hint of bitterness back there. Is it corny enough? I'm not sure that at 18% or at 13% corn, we got quite enough corny flavor in there. So I don't know where that breaking point's going to be to get corn. But then again, I know that if you put too much corn, I think suddenly people scream DMS. And so it's kind of a fine line to walk. But overall, this is an extremely crushable, delicious lager that, not a bad recipe if you ask me.
You did serve it to a sample of participants, had them rate the beer. Now, with Short and Shoddy, we do tell the participants what they're tasting, and we tell them a little bit about the style so they know what to look for. And then we ask them some questions. So let's take a look at some of the data that you got, starting with the average characteristic rating of the beer.
Most of the people selected dry and attenuated, which I would tend to agree with. It is a very dry finishing, well attenuated beer. It's not malty in what I would consider a traditional like toffee caramel malt kind of way. It's definitely just a nice, easy drinking, crisp lager as far as I can tell.
Now, this was a single hopped beer. In fact, you only used Mount Hood. So I was pretty curious to see what the prominent hop characteristics would be. And wow, you've got everything. Almost every single characteristic came up here.
As I'm looking at this, we have 4 people that chose fruity, which, I can kind of see that a little bit. There's like a hint of, citrus on there maybe. Earthy, though, kind of surprised me a little bit. Spicy, I kind of get, but 6 people picked earthy. That was probably the most prevalent. Another 4 picked spicy, 2 picked pine resinous, another 4 picked floral, which is kind of more what I'm getting from it. But that could just be the bias implanted of I know what Mount Hood is supposed to be. And then we also got melon, 2 melon, 2 dank caddy, 1 berry. And the only thing we're missing in this survey, where are you, onion and garlic guy? We could have been perfect. We could have hit them all, but onion and garlic guy didn't show up this time.
But the next question asks about malt characteristics, and there was a lot more agreement in opinion with this one.
Right. So we had 25 tasters total, and I believe 19 tasters put that cracker and bread crust was the most prevalent of all the flavors. And I have to agree with that. That's kind of what I got with it. I could see toasty, a little bit, maybe if you're thinking just kind of like dry white toast, maybe that kind of fits in that cracker kind of profile a little bit. But then there's one person picked nutty, and the other one people picked caramel sweet, and so I don't really pick those up. But it's their palates, and this is a survey, and so who knows what people are going to choose.
Now, the yeast characteristic, there's also largely agreement on that one as well. Seems like everybody thought it was clean.
17 of the 24 thought it was clean. I guess esters and phenolics both had 3 apiece. One person picked out sulfur. I can almost name you who that guy was in our brew club. I feel like every other beer I serve him picks out sulfur. And then one person picked wild.
Now, the next question is the one that I always look at when I'm doing my own short and shoddy brews, which is representative of target style, because this really does say, regardless of your own personal preference for a particular style, how representative do you think this particular beer is of this specific style? So in this case, was the short and shoddy brew really representative of this lager?
I am floored because 14 out of 24 people picked 4 out of 5. And that was the most massive one. And then you had another 4 people who I think might have been crazy. They picked it as a 5 out of 5. So that means we had 19 out of the 25 people picking it as a 4 or a 5 out of 5, which is absolutely flooring. I probably would have rated it closer to a 3 personally. It's a good beer. Is it a great pre-prohibition lager? Well, it's passable. It might be give it a 3, but only 3 people gave it a 3. 3 people gave it a 1, and then I guess one person gave it 2. So, but I'm pretty floored at the number of people that rated up at a 4 out of 5 and a 5 out of 5. That's amazing for a short and shoddy.
But regardless of representation, what do people think? Did they actually like the beer or not? And the answer seems to be pretty much yes, they really did.
Only 4 people chose, 5 out of 5, which is still quite a bit, and then 13 people gave it a 4 out of 5 on whether or not they actually liked the beer than their preference rating. And so that means that of the 25 people, 18 of them really enjoyed this beer. Because I think if you rated a 4 out of 5, that means you actually enjoyed it. Overall, no 1s and no 0s. And so to me, that's an absolute win. Again, I really enjoy this beer. It's somewhere around probably a 3 or a 4 for me. Will I be brewing this recipe again in the future? I wouldn't hesitate. I might swap out my hop choice just a little bit just to play with that, or maybe layer on some different hops. But overall, it's a really crushable, really drinkable beer, and it looks nice and clear and pretty too.
Hey, so this is Martin from next week's video. A big thanks to Will for filming his brew day and for talking through his objectively excellent pre-pro pills. And I do want to let you know that next week we have a special video where John Palmer will be stopping by to discuss pH in brewing. Now, John has generously shared his entire pH presentation with us. You'd normally have to attend a brewing convention to see this, and it's a real eye-opener. So look for that next week. And if it already is next week, you can already watch that video right here.